On Sunday, June 14th, 2026, the New York Times ran an article titled, "Why Everyone Wants Jon Ossoff to Run for President." And the Times mentioned that Senator Ossoff had an interesting profession before he was a senator. Disclaimer. We have no party affiliation, we are not associated with any political campaign, and we don't take money from anyone. Our editor, Elton Sherwin, gives us interesting topics to research, and we research them and summarize them as a short podcast. Our apologies if we get some things wrong or omit some things that are important.
Right, and that specific interesting profession is exactly what we are focusing on today, because it's definitely not your standard political resume.
No, not at all. I mean, imagine you're in your mid-20s.
Right.
You're sitting in this office in London just staring at a secure monitor.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other end of that live feed is an undercover journalist. And he's wearing this mask literally made out of strings of beads so nobody can see his face.
Which is incredibly intense.
Yeah. And he's secretly filming a high-ranking international soccer official taking a bag stuffed with like $65,000 in cash.
Yeah. And if that journalist gets caught, I mean, that situation turns lethal in seconds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, for this deep dive, we are looking at how managing that exact high-stakes scenario ended up being the ultimate training ground for a United States senator. Welcome. We've got a massive stack of sources for you today. We're talking university profiles, political fact checks, local Atlanta news, official Senate records.
It's a really thorough stack.
It is. And our mission today is to figure out how a millennial who spent his 20s producing these undercover documentaries about international crime, how he leveraged that really unconventional resume to become the chairman of one of the Senate's most powerful investigative committees.
Yeah, it's such a remarkable trajectory, mainly because it just totally defies the blueprint we usually see in government.
Right.
But to understand how he got there, we really have to look at the seeds of his interest in systemic power. And those seeds were planted surprisingly early, long before he ever crossed the Atlantic.
Yeah, let's look at the timeline. Because long before he's a CEO, he's just a high school kid in Atlanta. And at age 16, he writes a letter to Georgia Congressman John Lewis.
Wow. At 16.
Right. Most 16-year-olds are not doing that. But he does, and that letter actually lands him an internship in the congressman's office.
Which is a really crucial foundational detail. I mean, working for a civil rights icon like John Lewis, that forces a realization on a young person.
How so?
Well, you realize that if you want to fix systemic local issues, you have to understand the broader systems of power behind them. You're seeing the actual machinery of governance up close.
And that clearly influenced his next move, because he doesn't just go to any college. He specifically targets Washington, D.C., and he goes to Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service.
Right, graduating in 2009.
Yeah, and the sources point out he was studying under absolute heavyweights. We're talking former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and Dr. Daniel Porterfield.
Huge names in international relations.
Definitely. He was a culture and politics major. His peers talk about him having these intense late-night debates around the dining room table about healthcare and social justice.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Georgetown's School of Foreign Service is basically an incubator for the traditional diplomatic corps. You're being trained to operate inside the established apparatus of international statecraft.
But, you know, he's also just a normal guy during this time.
Yeah.
The sources have these great humanizing details, like he's a millennial who loves Star Wars.
Naturally.
He listens to Imagine Dragons. He even sang in a cappella group called the Georgetown Chimes.
Oh, that's great.
Right. So he's driven, but he originally thinks he wants to be a traditional diplomat. So he heads to the London School of Economics for a master's degree. And, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because I'm looking at this timeline, and it feels like a superhero origin story. But instead of a radioactive spider, he gets bitten by the investigative journalism bug. I have to push back here. Because you don't just graduate from the LSE and instantly start managing undercover stings in West Africa. Like, how does a guy pivot from studying traditional diplomacy to running a gritty investigative firm in London?
It's an excellent question, and I think it speaks to a major shift in his worldview.
Okay.
While he was studying the global political economy at the LSE, he seems to have realized the limitations of traditional statecraft. I mean, bureaucracies move slowly.
Very slowly.
And traditional diplomacy often means playing nice with corrupt regimes just to maintain stability. He realized you don't actually need to be inside the government to hold power accountable.
So he steps outside of it.
Exactly. By going into the private sector, specifically investigative journalism, he found a much faster mechanism for driving real transparency.
Which brings us to the actual interesting profession.
Yeah.
In 2013, he becomes the managing director and CEO of Insight TWI, a London-based production company.
Yeah.
And he owned 50% of it.
Right. And we need to explain what Insight TWI actually did.
Yeah, they produce these high-impact documentary films exposing foreign corruption, organized crime, war crimes.
And this was not glossy scripted television. The work was inherently dangerous. It required immense operational security. Let's look at one of the biggest examples from the sources, a documentary they produced called Betraying the Game.
The details of this sting are just wild. So Insight TWI was working with this highly acclaimed, deeply undercover Ghanaian journalist named Anis Eremiah Anis.
Yes.
And Anis goes to extreme lengths to protect his identity. That mask of beads I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
He wears that in public so nobody sees his face.
Yeah.
Because if they find out who he is, he's a dead man.
Exactly. And for Betraying the Game, they were investigating systemic corruption within international soccer. So Anis and his team pose as wealthy supporters of various soccer teams.
Classic undercover sting.
Right. It requires immense capital, airtight cover stories, and they actually caught referees on hidden cameras accepting cash bribes.
But it didn't even stop at the referees. It went all the way up. They captured footage of a member of the FIFA Council, the elite group that organizes the World Cup, accepting a bag with $65,000 in cash.
And the causal effect of capturing that specific footage was staggering. The fallout was immediate.
What happened?
Well, just hours before the documentary was broadcast by the BBC, the government of Ghana announced it was completely dissolving its National Soccer Association.
Wow.
And the timing is critical. This all happened right before the locations for the 2026 World Cup were announced. Insight TWI's journalism directly triggered a massive institutional shakeup.
And that wasn't just a one-off thing. The sources say they also won a One World Media Award for another BBC doc. In that one, they followed a woman who was confronting an ISIS commander in a prison over sex crimes.
Yes, incredibly heavy, globally significant work. But we should clarify Ossoff's specific role here.
Right.
Because he wasn't the guy wearing the hidden camera, and he wasn't the one confronting that ISIS commander in the prison.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you read the sources, he's basically acting like Q from the James Bond movies.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. He's not the secret agent out in the field dodging bullets. He's the guy back at headquarters running the logistics, making sure the equipment works, managing the budget so they don't go bankrupt.
Negotiating the broadcast deals with the BBC.
Exactly. And crucially, he's the one designing extraction plans and security protocols for journalists facing literal death threats. But, I mean, does that make him an intrepid journalist or just a corporate suit?
Well, managing a team in hostile environments requires intense diplomatic and operational skills. It's not just spreadsheets. If a cover is blown, that human risk is on you.
That's a heavy burden for someone in their 20s.
It is. And Ossoff articulated the philosophy behind this business perfectly. He said, and I quote, "Where law enforcement lacks the will or the capacity to deter or punish it, journalists need to take on some of that responsibility." So he viewed his corporate role, the funding, the logistics, the security, as the engine that actually facilitated that accountability.
Okay, so he's running this high-stakes logistical operation. But then we pivot to the next phase of his life. Because what happens when you take this highly complex international private sector resume and slam it into a brutal American political campaign?
You get a major collision of contexts, and we see this so vividly in his 2017 special election run for Congress in Georgia.
Now, real quick, before we get into this, I want to explicitly remind you, the listener, of our ground rules. We are about to look at some highly politically charged attack ads from that 2017 race.
Yes.
We are not taking a side here. We don't endorse any political candidate, any PAC, or any viewpoint. We are strictly looking at how independent fact-checkers evaluated the claims made about his business.
It's a fascinating case study in how business realities get weaponized. So let's look at the first major claim, which PolitiFact evaluated. The Congressional Leadership Fund ran a huge attack ad claiming that Al Jazeera, which the ad called a mouthpiece for terrorists, had been paying Ossoff thousands of dollars.
Right, and it paired this claim with grainy footage of Osama bin Laden basically yelling, "What is he hiding?" So PolitiFact investigates this, and they rate the ad mostly false.
Why mostly false?
Because it completely misrepresented how documentary syndication actually works. Yes, Al Jazeera was a client of Insight TWI. They bought broadcast rights to 9 of the 10 films the company produced during his time there. But what were the films actually about?
And that is the vital context. The films were exposing child trafficking, slave labor, corrupt doctors selling HIV/AIDS drugs on the black market.
Yeah, in Africa and Latin America, they had literally nothing to do with terrorism or the Middle East.
It's like being an independent filmmaker, right? You take out a loan, you take on all the financial risk to make an indie movie,
Right.
and then you take it to Sundance, and Netflix buys the distribution rights. Netflix didn't fund the movie, they just bought the right to stream it.
Exactly. Al Jazeera's English network operates globally, and they were simply the distributor buying the rights to pre-existing journalism. So framing that as taking money from terrorists is just a deliberate misunderstanding of media syndication.
Precisely. And then there's the second major attack, which was scrutinized by Ballotpedia. Conservative bloggers went after him for calling himself a small business owner.
Oh, right. They claimed he was a fraud, implying his company was like a shell corporation or something.
Right. So Ballotpedia dug into the weeds of corporate law. They went straight to the UK Companies Act of 2006.
And under that specific law, to be a small company, you have to meet strict thresholds for turnover, balance sheets, and employee counts.
Right. And they looked at Insight TWI. The company had 7 full-time employees and a balance sheet of 549,866 British pounds.
So by every metric of UK law, they legally qualified as a small business.
Yes, and documents from Companies House prove Ossoff legitimately owned 50% of the company's 100 shares.
So the facts are completely on his side. But to me, looking at this like a political funhouse mirror, they're taking boring corporate realities, foreign distribution deals, tax classifications, and twisting them into conspiracies.
Exactly.
My question is, how does a candidate combat that distortion without just putting the audience to sleep? Nobody wants to hear a speech about the employee thresholds of the UK Companies Act of 2006.
No, they boo you off the stage. You can't fight emotion with tax code. What's fascinating here is that this was the real crucible for Ossoff.
How so?
Well, he couldn't just point to his resume. He was forced to aggressively defend the moral integrity of his work under a harsh national spotlight. He had to explain the why of his business, not just the what.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, that experience of constantly having to translate complex logistics into clear, resonant messaging, it effectively road-tested his communication skills for the national stage.
I mean, obviously, that preparation paid off. Which brings us full circle. Fast forward to January 2021, the historic runoff election in Georgia.
A race that literally determined the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. Ossoff wins his runoff alongside Reverend Raphael Warnock.
And the milestones here in the sources are really striking. At just 33, Ossoff becomes the first millennial ever elected to the Senate. And he becomes the first Jewish senator from Georgia. This is profoundly touching detail. He took the oath using the Hebrew scripture of Rabbi Jacob Rothschild.
Right, the prominent leader of Atlanta's Temple Synagogue.
Yeah, who was deeply allied with the black community during the Civil Rights Movement. It's such a powerful nod to the history of systemic change there.
It really is. But the true climax of his interesting profession comes shortly after he's sworn in. He is appointed chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations.
The PSI. At 34, he becomes the youngest chairman in the entire history of that committee. And the PSI is essentially the apex predator of congressional oversight.
Oh, absolutely. It has a deeply storied history. I mean, Senator Harry Truman used it in the 1940s to investigate war profiteering.
Right. And in the 50s and 60s, under Chief Counsel Robert F. Kennedy, the PSI investigated labor racketeering and exposed the Sicilian Mafia to the American public.
Because the PSI holds incredibly broad subpoena powers. They can investigate crime, corruption, and government policy in the U.S. and abroad. They can compel witnesses to testify under oath and force massive corporations to hand over internal documents.
So what does this all mean? Look at the arc here. He spends his 20s as a CEO relying on bead masks and hidden cameras because he had no legal authority.
Right.
Now he's exposing corruption with federal subpoenas and congressional hearings.
This raises an important question, and it goes back to his CEO philosophy. He used to say, where law enforcement lacks the capacity, journalists need to take on the responsibility.
Because it was an end run around broken systems.
Exactly. But now, as PSI chairman, he is the capacity. He has the institutional power to force transparency. He just has to sign a subpoena. The mechanism changed, but the mission is exactly the same.
So for you listening right now, I think the ultimate takeaway is really about redefining executive experience. Whether you're running a business or trying to change your community, finding the truth, requires the same muscles.
Yes.
Managing hostile environments, parsing legal minutia, protecting the people doing the hard work, he learned politics by managing operational risk in the private sector. It proves that going off the beaten path can prepare you for leadership in ways a standard resume never could.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We are so conditioned to expect the lawyer to politician pipeline in government.
Oh, definitely.
We assume a law degree is the default prerequisite. But a background in anti-corruption journalism perfectly primes someone for congressional oversight. So, what other unconventional private sector professions might actually make for far more effective lawmakers than the traditional paths we always expect?
That is a great question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning those expected paths, keep exploring the sources for yourself, and we'll see you next time.